Did you know that an Egyptian queen nearly changed the fate of the greatest empire in history? We're not talking about just any figure, but Cleopatra, a woman who mastered not only the Egyptian throne, but also the arts of strategy, diplomacy, and seduction. Her name still echoes through the halls of history, not only for her legendary beauty, but also for her sharp mind and the courage to challenge the most powerful men in Rome. Stay with me until the end. What you discover next may surprise you. Imagine being surrounded by external threats, political intrigue, and pressure from a growing empire that already dominated much of the known world. Have you ever experienced this? Did you feel that everything around you demanded decisions that could completely change the course of your life? Cleopatra experienced this intensely. Leading a weakened Egypt, she found in her own cunning a way to resist Roman domination. But what makes her story so fascinating is that she didn't just react, she decided to act. Intelligently, she calculated each step and positioned herself as a key player in the Mediterranean political arena. Her encounter with Julius Caesar wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was a bold move that redefined alliances and created a son, Caesarion, an heir of mixed Egyptian and Roman blood. This episode alone caused an impact on the Roman Senate and raised suspicions about her true plans. Cleopatra didn't bow down. Her presence challenged the power patterns of the time and made it clear that despite being a woman and a foreigner, she knew how to remain relevant and indispensable. But the power struggle is relentless. With Caesar's death, Cleopatra finds herself faced with a new dilemma. Who would fill the political vacuum he left? Then comes Mark Antony, one of the most influential men of the time, commander of the Roman legions, and a prominent figure in the Republic's internal disputes. And it is there that a new alliance is formed, between two giants, in every sense of the word. Cleopatra and Mark Antony not only share a passionate passion, but also political interests that jeopardize the rise of Octavian Augustus. This union triggers chain reactions. Rome divides, chaos ensues, and Cleopatra returns to the spotlight. How could an Egyptian queen influence the course of a Roman civil war? How did her image shift from strategic leader to symbol of a threat to stability? These are questions that still reverberate throughout history and reveal the many sides of this impressive figure. Cleopatra wasn't just a woman enveloped in exotic perfumes and golden robes. She was a strategist, a ruler, a mother, and a lover, all amidst the whirlwind of political forces vying for control of the known world. Her role transcended the confines of Egypt. With every gesture, with every alliance, she shaped a future that defied historians' predictions. And it is precisely at this point that we begin to understand how her trajectory intersects the paths of power, love, and war, setting the stage for decisive moments that would change the destiny not only of Cleopatra, but of the entire East. With every detail of this journey, it's impossible not to wonder, what drove Cleopatra? Was it simply a desire to retain her throne, or was there something greater behind her bold gestures and dangerous alliances? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most in her story so far. What moment made you reflect on power, courage, or the limits of strategy? These stories aren't just about the past, they also make us think about the present, about how decisions shape destinies. And that's why, if you're enjoying this content, please leave a like. This will greatly help more people who enjoy Roman themes discover the video and connect with this fascinating universe. And look, if this kind of historical narrative captivates you as it is now, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss future episodes. And you'll also help keep this community alive and vibrant. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. Because the truth is, Cleopatra hasn't said her last word yet. The landscape that's forming around her is about to crumble, and with it the empires and hearts that try to control her. Imagine the complexity of being a leader in a world where alliances are fragile, empires are expanding, and decisions carry historical weight. Cleopatra was born into this scenario, daughter of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek lineage that had ruled Egypt for generations, but was already facing political erosion, internal revolts, and growing Roman influence. She rose to power amid instability, at a time when Egypt, though rich in culture and resources, was economically weakened and threatened by succession disputes. External pressure came from Rome, which expanded its territorial dominance and demanded submission from neighboring kingdoms. Cleopatra had no room for error, and perhaps this is precisely where her most intriguing journey began, not as a luxurious queen, but as a strategist who needed to rethink her mindset to face forces greater than herself. Unlike other rulers who surrendered or resisted with weapons, Cleopatra adopted an approach based on emotional and political intelligence. She deeply understood the inner workings of Roman power. She knew that victory was not just a matter of strength, but of influence, persuasion, and timing. At just 18, she shared the throne with her younger brother, as tradition required. But she soon realized that her decision-making ability would be stifled by advisors and outside interests. So she decided to transform her image. She began communicating directly with the Egyptian people in their language, something no other Ptolemaic had done. She positioned herself as a true daughter of the Nile, a maneuver that reinforced her legitimacy and empathy with her subjects. Internationally, she faced an even more complex dilemma. Rome viewed Egypt as a valuable piece on the imperial chessboard, useful for its agricultural wealth and strategic location. Any move by Cleopatra would be viewed with suspicion. It was at this point that her connection with Julius Caesar became not only controversial, but also highly impactful. More than a romance, it was a bold diplomatic move. By allying herself with one of the most influential men in the Roman world, she balanced forces and gained protection from internal and external enemies. This decision, however, raised alarm bells in Rome. Many saw Cleopatra as a threat in disguise, a woman who used seduction as a tool of domination. The hidden truth behind this narrative was far more complex. She was not only winning hearts, but also territories, stability, and time to rebuild her leadership. Cleopatra understood that survival was not enough. She needed to bring about transformation. She reshaped the role of women in politics, redefined power relations, and demonstrated that strategic intelligence could alter the course of empires. Within Alexandria, she transformed the court into a cultural and scientific center, attracting intellectuals, expanding education, and strengthening her image as a visionary leader. While Rome lost its way in internal disputes, Cleopatra consolidated a reign that encompassed not only physical domains, but also the symbolic narrative of what it meant to rule with cunning and presence. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding who Cleopatra really was requires exploring the power of the decisions she made and the impact those choices had not only on her life, but on the entire trajectory of the ancient world. Comment below, I'm on this journey too, so I know you're with me on this immersion. At that decisive moment when Julius Caesar landed in Egypt, political tensions were running high. Rome had won yet another civil war, and Caesar sought to reorganize his eastern alliances. Egypt, mired in internal disputes between Cleopatra and her brother, represented more than territory. It was a strategic key to Mediterranean equilibrium. And it is in this context that one of the most iconic scenes in ancient history unfolds. Cleopatra, prevented from meeting Caesar in person by rival forces within her own palace, decides to act. And her decision is no ordinary one. She rolls herself into a carpet, literally, and orders her allies to deliver her to Caesar as a gift. When the fabric unfurls before the Roman emperor, what he sees is not just a young queen, but a woman of extraordinary courage, style, and intelligence. This encounter is more than curious, it's revealing. Caesar, accustomed to military strategies and formal speeches, finds himself faced with a boldness that disarms him. Cleopatra doesn't ask for help, she offers an alliance. And more than that, she presents herself as the solution to the chaos threatening Egypt. That theatrical entrance becomes a political watershed, because at that moment, the power struggle ceases to be solely Roman. Cleopatra changes the tone of the conversation and repositions Egypt on the imperial chessboard, not as a subordinate piece, but as a strategic partner. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what began as a dramatic gesture soon evolves into a relationship fraught with interests, agendas, and consequences. Cleopatra not only wins Caesar over, emotionally, she lays the foundations for a new geopolitical configuration. The two begin to live together in Alexandria, a city she transforms into a stage of power and sophistication. During this period, she demonstrates mastery not only of etiquette, but also of rhetoric, science, and diplomacy. The behind-the-scenes look reveals a queen who mastered several languages and articulated decisions with precision. By becoming pregnant and giving birth to Caesarion, she strengthens the bond between Egypt and Rome and introduces the possibility of an heir with bloodlines from both empires, a symbol of fusion and continuity. Meanwhile, in Rome, Cleopatra's name began to circulate strongly, and not in a neutral way. Many senators saw her as a threat to republican stability because the hidden truth was simple. A foreign woman, influential, cultured, and the mother of Caesar's son, could not be ignored. Eyes turned to her with both admiration and distrust. Speeches began to question not only Caesar's presence in Egypt, but also Cleopatra's influence over his decisions. The Roman mentality of the time was not prepared to accept that a queen could shape imperial strategies through eloquence and presence. The impact of this relationship went beyond romance. Cleopatra expanded her channels of influence, strengthened the Egyptian economy, and re-established her internal legitimacy. With Caesar at her side, she eliminated political adversaries and restored order to the palace. More than a romantic ally, she established herself as a stateswoman. And this was disturbing because it demonstrated that prosperity, authority, and strategy could be wielded by a woman in a world dominated by men and swords. But Caesar's decisions were beginning to generate instability in Rome itself. His accumulation of power, coupled with Cleopatra's continued presence in his life, fueled conspiracies. Republican senators, led by Brutus and Cassius, saw centralization as a threat to the republican ideal. Cleopatra was gradually becoming part of the problem, even without physically being in Rome. It was as if her influence had transcended borders and taken root in the minds of those who feared losing ground to the new model that was emerging. Caesar's assassination in the Senate chamber marks the end of an era and the abrupt breakdown of this alliance. Cleopatra, upon learning of the emperor's death, finds herself facing a new situation, alone again, with a son who represents a fragile bond with Rome and a throne once again under threat. The transformation of Roman politics following the assassination ushers in the rise of other figures, among them Mark Antony. And it is here that the journey takes on new dimensions. Comment: that makes sense to me, because understanding how an unexpected entrance into a palace became a historical turning point is to see the power of timely decision-making. Cleopatra knew this, and perhaps this was her greatest asset from the very beginning. The bond between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar went beyond any simplistic definition. It wasn't just passion or diplomatic alliance, it was a rare fusion of strategy and a desire for transformation. While many saw their involvement as a personal relationship, the behind-the-scenes revealed a far more complex mechanism. Two leaders who understood the impact of every public gesture, every spoken word, every signal that transcended the confines of their inner selves. Cleopatra knew that by becoming Caesar's companion, she wasn't simply gaining protection, she was reshaping Egypt's role in the Roman eye. The arrival of Caesarion, Caesar's son with Cleopatra, adds an even denser layer to this plot. His birth was not merely a biological event, but a symbol. A half-Roman, half-Egyptian son, born amidst a context of power and tension, with the potential to inherit two empires. Caesarion's existence came to represent a hidden truth. Perhaps Caesar was ready to break with the traditional model of Roman succession, challenging the ideals of the Republic and ushering in an era of dynasties, family continuity, and expanded rule. The revelation of his birth was meticulous, almost theatrical. It wasn't about announcing an heir, it was about introducing a narrative of permanence. Cleopatra knew this. She understood that this boy, still draped in royal robes, would be a powerful player in the war of perceptions. While Rome seethed with debates and conspiracies, Alexandria became an alternative hub for decision-making. Cleopatra transformed her court into an environment of study, science, philosophy, and communication, and Caesar, despite Roman pressure, found in this atmosphere a space for planning, far from the brutal disputes of the Senate. Together, they created a setting where politics and intimacy naturally intertwined. Their relationship was unconventional. It required a strategic mindset, a renunciation of certainties, and the ability to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, both in the public eye and behind the diplomatic scenes. Cleopatra's position as Caesarion's mother cemented her in a role many dared not claim, not only queen, but also progenitor of a possible new type of ruler, someone who carried in her lineage the rare blend of two civilizations. And so the Roman Republic's adversaries began to treat this child as a threat, because more than being Caesar's son, he was the fruit of a decision, and decisions shape empires. The way Caesar cast Cleopatra during public events revealed admiration and respect. The way he involved her in discussions made it clear that she was no decorative consort. She was an interlocutor, a strategist, a role model, and this silently shifted the way women were viewed in the power struggles. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra wasn't limited to affection or casual politics. It represented a symbolic rupture in the classical narrative of imperial control. It was about building legacy, challenging traditions, and inaugurating a kind of influence that wasn't based on swords, but on presence, decisiveness, and articulate intelligence. A queen who didn't wait to be invited to the chessboard, she put herself there. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Julius Caesar's death wasn't just a final point in a leader's trajectory. It was a silent implosion that altered the foundations of Roman power. Upon receiving the news, Cleopatra faced not only the grief of losing a partner, but also the collapse of a carefully constructed alliance. A sense of vulnerability hung over Alexandria. Caesarion, now the emperor's orphan, became a symbol of an uncertain future. The palace corridors betrayed internal tensions. Advisors struggled to understand the developments. Generals wondered what their next move would be, and Cleopatra, alone in the face of chaos, decided to reorganize her own mindset. It was time to act coolly, without losing the essence of what made her strategically brilliant. In Rome, the void left by Caesar gave way to new ambitions. Mark Antony, already an influential figure in military campaigns, emerged as the informal heir to a leadership in tatters. His rise wasn't simply a consequence of political positioning. It reflected the need to reorganize forces in a world that had just witnessed the literal stabbing of stability. And it was precisely in this scenario that Cleopatra saw an opportunity. The emotional impact of the loss was soon replaced by a series of calculated decisions. She understood that, to remain on the imperial stage, she couldn't isolate herself. She needed to understand who the new players would be. The rapprochement between Cleopatra and Mark Antony begins tensely, almost pragmatically. He, attracted by the queen's Egyptian wealth and magnetism, sees in her a powerful ally. She, in turn, realizes that Mark Antony possesses something few men of the time possess, the audacity to break protocol and face power with intensity. The two share not only political interests, but also a worldview guided by expansion, cultural refinement, and the ability to seduce not just individuals, but entire crowds. Their encounter is not casual. It is a response. It is a reaction to the need to restore influence in a scenario that offered no guarantees. The first conversations between the two carried a curious tone. Amidst wine, music, and philosophical discussions, behind the scenes, trust was carefully built. Cleopatra didn't impose herself, she enchanted. And Mark Antony, even coming from battles and difficult decisions, found himself gradually disarmed by the fluidity with which the queen articulated the future. The transformation of this relationship occurred gradually but intensely. Soon their romance transcended the private sphere and began to shape public strategies. Alexandria once again became the center of imperial decision-making. Joint celebrations, administrative acts, and even military interventions began to bear their signatures. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this partnership between Cleopatra and Mark Antony isn't just a continuation of what happened with Caesar. It's a new kind of journey, where decisions are made from a place of reconstruction. The world around us is no longer the same. The Roman Senate is divided, forces are fragmenting, and discourses are taking on increasingly extreme forms. In this context, Cleopatra is taking a risky gamble, a new model of influence where it's not just about survival, but about reigning with purpose. She comments, "That makes sense to me." The rise of Cleopatra and Mark Antony as a political couple was not a simple romance amidst Roman chaos. It was a maneuver that directly challenged the new power structure led by Octavian Augustus. The chemistry between the two was undeniable, but what was truly striking was how this relationship translated into diplomatic decisions with real impact. Cleopatra, ever calculating, saw in her relationship with Mark Antony an opportunity to maintain Egypt as a central piece of the imperial game. And by joining the queen, He was not simply committing to a relationship, he was choosing a side that was not that of traditional Rome, but that of a new narrative that blended passion, strategy, and female protagonism. The empire at this time was divided between those who defended Octavius as Caesar's legitimate successor and those who saw in Mark Antony a more organic continuation of military strength and expansionist vision. The hidden truth was that behind the ceremonies, parties, and alliances, there was a silent struggle for cultural influence. While Rome clung to republican traditions, Alexandria flourished as a hub of ideas, art, and science. Cleopatra knew how to exploit this. She organized banquets that resembled disguised diplomatic meetings. She received emissaries, discussed trade strategies, and strengthened military ties, all with an aura of charm that confounded even the most resistant. The image of the two together caused unease in Rome. Cleopatra was no longer just an exotic queen. She was a woman who had captured the heart and mind of one of the most powerful generals of the time. And this, for Octavian, represented a threat. He knew that public opinion could be shaped by symbols, and Cleopatra, alongside Mark Antony, represented an alternative world, where authority came not from tradition, but from decision. Where power was imposed not by force, but by magnetism, Octavian needed to destroy this image, and he set to work on it with precise speeches, articulate propaganda, and narratives that undermined the couple's reputation. He painted Cleopatra as a manipulator, Mark Antony as a traitor. It was a war of ideas, where every word spoken in Rome attempted to destabilize the bond that was strengthening in Egypt. But Cleopatra didn't back down. Her presence alongside Mark Antony on military campaigns, in negotiations with neighboring kingdoms, and even at public celebrations, showed that this alliance was not fleeting. It was a merger that defied boundaries. The queen, who had already faced internal adversaries, now positioned herself before a contested empire. And most impressively, she did so with elegance and precision. Her every move seemed meticulously calculated, not out of coldness, but out of awareness of the impact she could make. It was proof that leadership is also about vision and presence. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the clash with Octavius wasn't just in the political arena. It permeated culture, beliefs, and the behind-the-scenes details that shape what the public sees and believes. Cleopatra, a woman who had already challenged standards since her entrance on a carpet before Caesar, now faced one of Rome's most strategic minds, and she knew that winning this duel would require not just strength, but emotional intelligence, mastery of narrative, and resilience. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. The tension between Rome and Alexandria was no longer just a matter of rhetoric, it was moving toward direct conflict. The rivalry between Octavian and Mark Antony intensified, each moving their pieces with strategic precision. But it was in Cleopatra's mind that one of the boldest decisions of this journey was taking shape. Knowing that Egypt would be drawn into the final conflict, she did not hesitate to take a stand. Alongside Mark Antony, she was not merely sealing a political pact, she was tying the fate of her empire to the battle that would decide the future of the Mediterranean. And this was the scenario that preceded Actium, a mixture of expectation, ambition, and quiet fear. The Battle of Actium was not just a military confrontation, it was a clash of mentalities. On one side, Octavian, with his disciplined structure, well-trained generals, and the calculated support of the Senate. On the other, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, with an imposing fleet, Eastern alliances, and the symbolic power of a union that defied all Roman traditions. The behind-the-scenes story indicated an already present imbalance. While Octavian relied on tactical efficiency, Cleopatra and Mark Antony seemed still clinging to an ideal of aesthetic, diplomatic, and emotional influence. The naval battle, which took place in Greek waters, was swift and brutal. Amid the chaos of burning ships, failed maneuvers, and unexpected retreats, the image that changed everything emerged. Cleopatra, sensing imminent collapse, orders a retreat with her fleet. Mark Antony, torn between military reason and emotional impulse, abandons command to follow her. The impact of this decision was devastating. Troop morale plummeted, leadership fragmented, and Octavian took cold control of the situation. The result was not just a defeat, it was the shattering of an ideal. Alexandria, once a center of bold decisions, found itself surrounded by rumors, tension, and expectation. The hidden truth behind Cleopatra's retreat was not cowardice, it was calculation. She understood that persisting in a battle already committed meant condemning her people to chaos. Once again, she chose to preserve what could still be rebuilt, even if it required facing trials and redefining alliances. What followed was an intense attempt at political reconciliation. Cleopatra attempted to negotiate directly with Octavian, offering conditional surrender, diplomatic arguments, and even trade strategies that might reverse the animosity. But Octavian didn't want compromise. He wanted dominance. He wanted to erase from history the image of a queen who defied Rome, seduced its leaders, and attempted to fuse distinct cultures into an alternative power project. Mark Antony, mired in frustration and wounded pride, refused to accept defeat. The psychological consequences of that clash were visible in every gesture, every prolonged silence. Cleopatra observed everything. She knew that the next decisions would require not brute force, but the ability to play with time, symbols, and what remained of emotional control. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Actium wasn't the end. It was the trigger. It was the moment Cleopatra understood that if she wanted to rewrite the last page of her story, she would need to transcend even the idea of survival. Her journey would cease to be merely political and become existential. Egypt was no longer a throne, it was a message. A way to show the world that decisions, however bitter, reveal who we truly are in the face of the impact of transformation. Comment: that makes sense to me. Cleopatra's final scene is shrouded in mystery, emotion, and powerful symbols. What could have led the most strategic and imposing woman of her time to end her journey in such dramatic fashion? For many, the queen's death was pure suicide, despair in the face of the imminent Roman conquest, mourning the fall of Mark Antony, the end of all plans for a merger between empires. This is the version that has spanned centuries, reinforced by poets, historians, and Rome itself, which needed to transform Cleopatra's defeat into a symbol of warning. But if we look behind the scenes through a different lens, the outcome may seem quite different. Some say Cleopatra never intended to surrender. After his victory at Actium, Octavian marched to Alexandria with the firm intention of capturing and displaying the queen as a trophy, a powerful woman who, by being humiliated in Rome, would reaffirm the Republic's superiority. But Cleopatra knew the weight of image, narrative, and legacy. She understood that the end should not be written by her enemies, but by her own hand. Dying calculatedly was perhaps the last possible move for someone who spent her life transforming decisions into impact. More than a simple act of desperation, it would be a choice imbued with strategic thinking, to prevent her history from being distorted, to prevent her figure from being transformed into a spectacle of someone else's victory. The famous theory about the snake, the aspis hidden in a basket of fruit, has always been shrouded in doubt. Some scholars suggest the venom was too slow-acting for an immediate end. Others suggest that Cleopatra may have used a combination of substances, the result of her extensive studies and frequent medical consultations. After all, she was known for her scientific curiosity, her mastery of alchemy, and her contacts with wise men from various parts of the ancient world. Nothing in this woman's trajectory indicated impulsiveness. Everything was studied, choreographed, and precisely planned. This makes it plausible that her death was a final assertion of control. But there's a third perspective that delves even deeper into this interpretation, that Cleopatra didn't die for love of Mark Antony, nor for fear of Octavian. She died for her identity. Because living as a prisoner, as a fixture in a Roman parade, as a caricatured figure under the gaze of her enemies, would be a betrayal of everything she had built. The end, in this case, would be her last great decision, an act not of finality but of legacy, a way to remain queen even in physical absence. And this explains why, to this day, her image endures. It endures as a symbol of feminine power, as a reference for unconventional leadership, as a living memory of someone who knew how to combine intelligence and sensitivity in a time that didn't recognize these virtues in women. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because by analyzing this death from a symbolic perspective, we realize that Cleopatra's end represents more than the end of a political era. It's the end of a model of protagonism, a way of exercising power that challenged hierarchies, beliefs, and borders. And this makes us ask, what does leaving a legacy really mean? Is it being present in monuments, titles, and official records? Or is it marking history in such a way that Even centuries later, decisions echo as profound revelations about courage, vision, and impact. Write down, "This makes sense to me." Cleopatra's fall was not just the death of a queen, it was the last gasp of a sovereign Egypt. When Octavian crossed the gates of Alexandria, the image he encountered was no longer that of a woman at war, it was absence. Cleopatra had anticipated once again, taking upon herself the right to choose how she would be remembered. But what came after this was not just the occupation of a territory, it was the complete reorganization of a civilization. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which for centuries had ruled Egypt with Hellenistic traits and local tradition, found its final chapter. And it was not a silent end. It was a milestone that redefined the power map of the ancient world. Egypt, which for generations had been seen as an empire of culture, science, and ancient mysteries, now became a Roman province, not through military failure, but through a complex sequence of political decisions, alliances, and narrative disputes. Octavian didn't destroy Egypt with swords, he annexed it with strategic diplomacy and symbolic control. Cleopatra's memory was immediately manipulated. Roman historians portrayed her as seductive, manipulative, and irresponsible, all to justify domination and erase the legitimacy of the queen who dared to confront empires. It was an efficient way to rewrite history, transforming the protagonist into a villain so that the conqueror would be seen as a savior. But the reality behind the scenes was different. Cleopatra had resisted. She built bridges, forged legacies, challenged men and structures bound by rigid traditions. The transformation she brought about cannot be measured solely by battles won or lost. It lies in the way women came to be seen as potential leaders, as symbols of autonomy, and as articulators of destiny. Because while Rome celebrated its conquest, Alexandria silently mourned the end of the era in which decisions were made by those who knew the people, the customs, and the internal dilemmas of Egypt. Roman rule brought infrastructure, laws, and commercial expansion, but it also took with it the right to choose sovereignty and identity that for millennia had made Egypt unique. Even with integration into the Roman system, the marks of the ancient kingdom persisted. The temples withstood the test of time. Myths continued to circulate among the people, and Cleopatra's name did not disappear like so many others. On the contrary, it grew stronger over the centuries. Her image began to arouse admiration even among Roman intellectuals. The impact of her journey transcended immediate politics. She became a benchmark of mentality, decisiveness, and courage. Her story represents a turning point between eras. The end of the Ptolemaic dynasty was also the end of a model of leadership with deep roots in Egyptian culture. The replacement by Roman governors was the practical reflection of a loss that could not be measured solely by maps or treaties. It was a cut to the soul of a people who, until then, knew their fate was in local hands. Cleopatra's legacy was not erased. It was codified. It survives in documents, coins, works of art, and above all, in the collective memory that resists the imposition of official truths. Because in her every move, there was intention. In every public speech, there was construction. And even in the end, she did not disappear. She chose how she would be remembered. Egypt became Rome's, yes, but the figure of the woman who stood up to the greatest empire in history remains one of the most fascinating, provocative, and studied of the ancient world. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen surrounded by myths and dramatic moments. She was, above all, a mind that navigated the complexities of power with a rare ability for strategic reading. Throughout this journey, we saw a woman who, amid the collapse of empires and the rise of new leaders, didn't just react. She constructed narratives, shaped perceptions, and influenced directions. Her entrance into the palace wrapped in a carpet already signaled that she wouldn't play by the usual rules. There, not only an alliance was born, but a political figure capable of bending even the most rigid protocols. And this is revealing. Between Caesar and Mark Antony, Cleopatra maintained control of the relationship with a skill that transcended affection. With each, she created contexts that benefited her own leadership, protected her people, and fueled her vision of imperial continuity. The romances were only one layer. What lay beneath was calculation, decision, and presence. By placing her son as a potential heir, she directly affected the structures of succession that sustained Rome. By maintaining Alexandria as a cultural and diplomatic center, she projected alternatives to the Roman model of power, and even when facing Octavian, she didn't just resist. She offered negotiations, alternatives, proposals. She never expected to be saved. She always tried to salvage what she could with intelligence. Her enemies preferred to portray her as an unstable seductress, a woman driven by passions. But behind the scenes, we see another version, that of a ruler who understood the codes of international politics, who spoke several languages, who studied science, philosophy, and medicine. Her influence crossed borders and affected decisions that extended far beyond the Mediterranean. When Roman historians began writing her history, they chose the angle that benefited them. The Cleopatra they portrayed was the defeated, vanquished, exotic one. But by carefully revisiting her every move, we realize that her legacy isn't in the labels. It's in the consequences of her actions, because even her death, shrouded in mystery, carries a trace of narrative control. That defies simplistic explanations. She didn't leave behind pyramids like the ancient pharaohs. She didn't write manifestos, but the effects of her strategic mindset resonate to this day. Cleopatra transformed the role of women in politics, anticipated values of autonomy, and showed that power can also be expressed in how one thinks, how one negotiates, and how one chooses one's own destiny. In a time when many leaders still base decisions on fear of others' opinions, she chose to influence through the clarity of her objectives, even when it required boldness and disruption. And perhaps this is the great revelation hidden in her trajectory. Protagonism is born not only of strength, but of the intention behind every gesture. As we revisit each chapter of her life, the inevitable question emerges: was Cleopatra a victim of history, shaped by the tales of her rivals, or was she the most strategic mind of her generation, who anticipated her time and dared to challenge the gears of world power? Because when everything is analyzed carefully, what appears to be weakness can reveal depth, and what was labeled vanity may have been vision. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of this story touched something deep inside you. So leave a comment. I'm with you until the end, so I know this journey resonated with you. If this content brought you reflection, knowledge, or genuine curiosity, please leave a like. It really helps keep this conversation alive with those who also love delving behind the scenes of history. And of course, if this kind of approach makes you think differently, subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll stay up to date with everything that's yet to come, because the path continues to be full of revelations. There's a video right here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this universe. Click through and follow along with me there.